Hi, I'm Fiona, the pelvic floor physio with pelvicfloorexercise.com.au. Today I just want to talk a little bit about the pelvic floor, what it is, where it is, and how does it work. So this is the pelvis, and our pelvic floor sits in the base of the pelvis. It attaches to the pubic bone at the front and the tailbone at the back, and then out to the sit bones at the sides. You'll often hear the pelvic floor described as a hammock, and here's the hammock effect through here. Now there's two main layers to the pelvic floor, and we might just have a little look at the one I prepared earlier over here. So here's our two distinct layers of pelvic floor muscles, and again you can see our hammock effect. If we look at it from below, we've got the anus, the vagina and the urethra. Now this outer layer of muscles, there's a ring of muscle around the anus and a ring of muscle around the vagina and the urethra. So this is our external anal sphincter, which is very important in keeping you continent with the bowel. And then we've got the bulbo muscles around the vagina and the urethra. So effectively we have like a figure 8 of muscles here. And then this muscle through here, the transverse perineal, is a supportive muscle that attaches to the two sit bones to help support the perineum. These are the closing muscles, the feeling of closing the anus and closing the vagina. And then we have our deeper layer of muscles called levator ani. That's the big shelf of muscle that the organs, the bladder, the uterus and the bowel sit on. Now, when you see most things where people are talking about doing a pelvic floor contraction, you see this little hammock drawn and it's a close and a lift. And some people even imagine it as one muscle when in fact it's a big group of muscles. When we tighten the pelvic floor, the best way to think about it is the external layer of muscles is a closing. So we close the anus, close the vagina, and then it's our deeper layer that does the lift. But when we think of it like that hammock, we're thinking lifting up like that. So what I'd like to show you is, in reality, our pelvis doesn't sit like that. In real life, our pelvis actually sits in this position. So my pelvis, this bony bit here, is sitting here. So my pelvis actually sits in this position. So if my anus and vagina are going to close, or closing around the anus and vagina and lifting, I should actually feel that sense that I'm pulling towards the front, just above my pubic bone. I'm not pulling upwards. And I think that's where a lot of people get the sucking the tummy problem coming in when they're trying to tighten their pelvic floor, because you're thinking up. So if we're thinking in the correct position, the anus is here. If I'm closing and lifting, I should feel as if I'm pulling towards above my pubic bone. There's been a lot of research done on the pelvic floor, and Kay Crotty from the UK showed us that using a posterior cue, starting from the back, close the anus and vagina, coming forwards, actually gives us better compression of the urethra, which is what we want, because when you cough or sneeze, the pressure from the tummy pushing down onto the pelvic organs, if you don't contract that pelvic floor and tighten up the muscles and the fascial tissue, that's when we start to have a leak. So we're going to think about closing the anus and vagina and lifting forwards towards this area here. At the same time, there should be a gentle tightening across the lower belly. There shouldn't be a sucking in of the belly button. And that's what a lot of people do, is think they have to suck the belly button in. But as soon as you do that, you're breathing in, pushing down on those pelvic organs and making it even harder for your pelvic floor to contract. So if you're trying to break it down, the best thing to do is gently exhale as you do it, because as you breathe out, the diaphragm comes up, reduces that tension on the pelvic organs and allows your pelvic floor to contract more effectively. So if we now look from the opposite end and we're looking down into the pelvis, there's the tailbone, and we can see the anus, the vagina and the urethra. Now if we just take the outer layer of muscles off and have a little look at our deep levator layer, it's like a big horseshoe shape of muscles, and it's made up of several muscles. There's this gap in between the two sides of the muscle, which is known as the levator hiatus. So that's the area that where your vagina and your urethra sit. So when we've got a good, strong, functioning pelvic floor, the muscles should be quite bulky and that gap should be reasonably small. And under pressure, when these muscles tighten, remember they close, they shorten and lift forwards, they close that gap to help hold the organs above against the pressure downwards, and it helps to close off the sphincters to stop you from leaking or passing wind when you don't want to. So it's very important that we get the contraction correct, that we coordinate it with the breathing. So to start with, we will often start you on gentle exhale, close and lifting with the pelvic floor. Practicing those individual exercises, we can certainly work on building strength and bulk in these muscles so they support the organs better. But once we've got to a certain point, we then need to start working on coordinating them, because we want them to contract correctly when we cough, when we sneeze, when we jump. Those are the times that we often find we get those little leaks. When you're playing tennis, when you're jumping on the trampoline's a big one that we hear ladies saying, I can't jump on the trampoline because I leak. So that's when we work towards coordinating the pelvic floor with the diaphragm, which we'll talk about another day.